Oh, I always hit the wrong share button. All right. Can I have some thumbs up from some panelists to make sure you can all see my screen? Okay. Okay, great. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started because it's already getting later into our evening, and maybe we'll finish before the sun goes down and you can still enjoy a sunset or something like that. So, my name is Eleanor Hines. I am the North Sound Waterkeeper at Resources, and I might fluctuate how quickly I talk tonight because I am going to interpret or we have interpreters tonight. And so I want to make sure that they're able to keep up. This is also my first time doing this. So any technical difficulties or other issues we have tonight, you can blame on me. Our interpreters are super professional and know what they're doing. It's entirely probably my fault if anything goes wrong, so apologies in advance. But we are here tonight to talk about how you all can help us change how toxic sites are cleaned up in Washington state. This is a webinar on the Model Toxics Control Act Rulemaking update. And so tonight we have partners who are all going to be incorporated into this presentation from Twin Harbors Waterkeeper, Washington Conservation Action, Duwamish River Community Coalition, and Communities for a Healthy Bay, as well as resources. And so tonight we are going to offer this in Spanish as well as Vietnamese. And so I'll let our interpreters speak a little bit to how folks can get to the interpretation button.
Hi, my name is Carol, and along with Barbara, we'll be interpreting in Spanish and English simultaneously today during the session. First of all, we'd like to thank the organizers of this event for their commitment to language justice and to creating multilingual spaces. Language justice includes being able to communicate, speak, understand, and be understood in the language in which we feel most comfortable. We recognize that not all of our languages can be present due to different causes of displacement and the ongoing effects of colonization. We honor these native languages, including sign languages, giving them this space and recognizing that we are all on the stolen and unceded lands of native nations. Language justice takes all of us. For everyone present today, you can help by speaking at a moderate pace, loudly and clearly. If we need you to speak more slowly or loudly, we'll let you know through the chat. Please don't suffer in silence. If you have a problem, please let us know through a chat. In a moment, the interpretation function will be turned on. To access via computer, you'll see a globe in the lower part of your screen with a message about language interpretation. Click on the globe and select the language in which you'd like to participate and listen during the session. Please mute the original audio to hear the interpretation clearly. To access via tablet or phone, you can click on the three dots and select language interpretation, and then choose your language, mute the original audio, then hit done. I will now give the instructions in Spanish. Ahora voy a dar las instrucciones en español. Hola, mi nombre es Carol y junto con Bárbara estaremos interpretando en inglés y en español simultáneamente durante la sesión de hoy. Primero que nada, queremos agradecer a los organizadores de este evento por su compromiso a la justicia de lenguajes y al crear espacios multilingües. La justicia de lenguajes incluye poder comunicarse, hablar, entender y ser entendidos en el idioma en el que nos sintamos más cómodos. Reconocemos que no pueden estar presentes todos nuestros idiomas. Hay diferentes causas del desplazamiento y los efectos continuos de la colonización. Honramos estos idiomas nativos, incluyendo lenguajes de señas, dándoles este espacio y reconociendo que todos estamos en las tierras robadas no concedidas de las naciones nativas. La justicia del lenguaje nos necesita a todos. Para todos presentes hoy pueden ayudar hablando a ritmo moderado, voz alta y claramente. Si necesitamos que hablen más despacio o más fuerte, les dejaremos saber a través del chat. Por favor, no sufran en silencio. Si tienen problemas, déjenos saber a través del chat. En un momento encenderán la función de interpretación. Para acceder por computadora, verán un icono del globo en la parte baja de sus pantallas con un mensaje sobre la interpretación de idiomas. Haga clic en el globo y elija el idioma en el que les gustaría participar y escuchar durante esta sesión. Por favor, poner en mudo el audio original para escuchar la interpretación claramente. Para acceder por tablet o celular, puede hacer clic en los tres puntos en la esquina derecha de la parte baja de su pantalla, elija interpretación de idiomas y después seleccione ese idioma. Asegúrese de poner en mudo el audio original y hacer clic en finalizado. Ya podemos encender la función. We can turn on the function now.
Okay, it's gonna take me a moment to get there because it got covered up. Okay. So I'm seeing a thumbs up. Sorry. Okay, so in a moment, let me go back one. So we are on the webinar format tonight, and so I invite you to use any of the webinar functions, such as the chat box, the Q&A box. We prefer that you put your questions in the Q&A box. It helps us tidy or keep track of what questions have been asked a little bit better. There's also the chat box. We invite you to feel free to drop links or other resources that you have or add in comments or other things like that. Or if you're having technical difficulties, that's a really great place, and you can choose to message everyone, or you can choose just to message the panelists. There should also be captions if folks prefer to have captions also. During this webinar, reactions, you can put a reaction button. And so maybe if you're tuning in Spanish, if you want to give a thumbs up, if you're tuning in Vietnamese, if you want to give us a little, there's like a little trumpet with like, I forget what it's called. I should know what it's called. A little celebration emoji. If you want to do that, just so we have an idea of how many folks might be engaging in those different ones. And then there's also always the raise hand function. And so we'll likely wait until the end to use the raise or address hands raised so that we can flow throughout the whole presentation. But we do encourage you to type any questions into the Q&A or other things into the chat box while we go. So I will give you a brief overview for this evening. We're going to start off with me giving you a overview of the Model Toxics Control Act and a little bit about the SHARP tool that goes along with that. And then we will go into some community stories from some of our partners to talk a little bit about their local contaminated sites. And then we will wrap up with Katie letting everyone know how they can take action. And so there will be a hands-on opportunity for you all to take action tonight. So don't be too far away from your computer towards the end of this presentation so that you can take action with us. And then we'll end with questions, answers, and discussion for those who want to stick around. So let's move into talking toxics. And while I'm talking, I'm going to ask Katie to maybe monitor the chat for me. Oh, okay. We are having an issue with, this is why somebody else I'm realizing should have started this. I'm sorry, I need to get out of this so I can deal with the interpretation function, and I will have some additional person in the future who can help out with all this. So just bear with me. I'm sorry, folks. I am not seeing my interpretation function on here. We are all learning. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mindy. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop sharing screen for a moment to see if I can fix this. I am so sorry. am seeing, I'm not sure. We had this all set up beforehand, I swear. Alright, Um, Erin, are you able to manage? Because under manage, I'm not sure what to do because it's, oh, it looks like it should be just fine.
Yeah, I'm not able to manage, but I can see that it is there.
Okay, what I'm gonna do, Erin, I'm just gonna make you host.
Okay.
So Erin is going to work on fixing the Vietnamese function. I appreciate everyone's patience as we work through this. I am learning so much right now about ways to do it better next time. Okay. And we were on the slide, I believe. All right. Let's try this again and hopefully we'll get it all working smoothly sooner than later. Okay, so talking about the Model Toxics Control Act. So thank you so much again for joining us tonight. Before we dive into how you can comment on the rulemaking process, you might like a little more information on what MACA is. For starters, MACA is the pronunciation of the abbreviation MTCA, which stands for the Model Toxics Control Act. MACA was started as a citizens' initiative in 1988 when folks realized the federal level Superfund site program wasn't working fast enough to get our legacy contaminated sites cleaned up. MACA includes strong provisions for including the public throughout the cleanup process and broadened the definition of liability, allowing the state to go after polluters. The overarching goal of MACA is the protection of human health and the environment through addressing historically polluted sites. A lot has been learned in the past 30 plus years, and it is high time for an update, which is why we're here tonight. So, digging in a little bit into the MACA process. We will send out a document after the webinar with information with important links so that you can go back and review some of this information and dive a little deeper into some of this afterwards. Please note that on this infographic here, wherever there are the orange bubbles, that is an opportunity for a public comment. Also, I should note that the Washington State Department of Ecology is responsible for oversight of the MACA process. For short, we often refer to the department simply as ecology. The first step in the site discovery, or in the MACA process, is site discovery. Someone has to report a suspected contamination. Ecology will follow up with an initial investigation to figure out whether there may be just a tiny spill or the site is contaminated enough to trigger the rest of the MACA process and to be added to the confirmed and suspected contaminated site list. An interim action, on a side note, is something that can happen at any time during the MACA process. This is a partial cleanup. A typical example that I've seen is when there might be oil leaking directly into a waterway and needs to be addressed before the final cleanup, which could take years. The hazardous assessment is the next step in the MACA process, where ecology will rank the site's hazards and comparing them to other known sites. This is an important step in our mind for environmental justice, where we hope to see better language in the rule to close the gap for communities disproportionately impacted. Too often, we see contaminated sites left to sit for decades without being cleaned up because there isn't enough of a perceived economic incentive to do so. There's also something called the SHARP tool. I won't dive too deep into the differences between rules and policies, but suffice to say that we are mainly focused here on the rule update. However, SHARP is a policy update. And so we are pleased to see that in this rule, it stipulates that whenever this policy is updated, there should be a public comment period on it. This policy helps guide how the rule should be implemented. It can be tricky to get rules updated. Hence, it's been about 30 years since the last rule update on MACA. So this policy is meant to be more of a tool that can be updated more periodically in between those rulemaking updates. It is used to help determine which sites are prioritized for cleanup. There's also something called the agreed order and consent decree. These are legal documents you will often see open for public comment. They usually outline who is responsible for what and the terms of the cleanup. Potentially liable persons is another term you may often come across. PLPs, or potentially liable persons, are considered liable for cleanup costs and may or may not have been responsible for the pollution. The remedial investigation and feasibility study are two steps often combined. The remedial investigation is a scientific study of the site to determine the characteristics of the contamination, such as what is it, where is it, and how much of it is there. The feasibility study then looks into the potential cleanup actions that meet the criteria for protection of human health and the environment. The preferred alternative cleanup is done or is something that comes up during the feasibility study. And this is there are a range of different cleanups that are presented in the feasibility study. And the preferred alternative cleanup is the one that is identified as the one that they prefer, hence preferred alternative, to make it onto the next step in the MACA process. However, there is a public comment period on this first. The disproportionate cost analysis, or DCA, is what is used in the feasibility study to help determine the preferred alternative cleanup. We also view this as a very important point in the cleanup process because it determines which alternative or which remedy is used for the final cleanup. And there is a lot of room for improvement here. Essentially, this analysis is supposed to select which cleanup alternative gets the most bang for its buck to maximize the amount of benefits to humans and the environment for each dollar spent. Unfortunately, this seems to give a lot more value on the cost of the cleanup while underestimating the actual benefits received. There will be a little bit more on this later. The cleanup action plan is the next step where it further refines the preferred alternative cleanup. There again is a public comment period for this draft. Following that, there's then the engineering design report that goes into greater detail to make the cleanup action plan shovel ready. And the much anticipated cleanup of the site is the next step, which typically takes a long time to get to. If all goes well and you make it through the cleanup, next comes monitoring and site use controls. So after the cleanup, monitoring occurs to ensure that the cleanup worked as intended. There may also be what are called site use controls, which restrict activities on the site that could disturb the cleanup. In some cases, they don't actually remove all the contaminants from the site. And so it is important that while there might not be direct exposures to humans or the environment, that those restrictions remain in place. And if all goes well, a review process takes place and the contaminated sites will be delisted. Monitoring and site use controls may still be in place even after a site is delisted. A common question that at least I get when we do tours of our Bellingham Bay waterfront of our MACA sites, a lot of folks are interested in the question, who pays for it? And unfortunately, there is no simple answer. It usually depends. There is a site hazardous substance tax that helps to cover the cost, and the potentially liable persons are often responsible for the cleanup cost. This can depend on whether a site is private or public property owned. And there's also public participation is something included in MACA. As mentioned, there are several key points in this process where you, as the public, can participate and share your feedback. Ecology must address each comment received. Also note that if there isn't a public meeting scheduled, Ecology has to schedule one if 10 or more people request that a public meeting be held. Generally, it's important to comment early in the process as it becomes harder to make larger changes further down in the process. Always feel free to reach out to any of us, but Ecology staff are also there to help answer questions at any time. Also note that this is an opportunity to make improvements during this rulemaking to make sure that the public participation makes sense to all of you because it's meant for you to participate as part of the public. So I like to make sure that you all have a sense of how to access information on sites local to you. You may search on Ecology's Toxic Cleanup Program website to find specific cleanup sites by their page, like the one here. We'll also send you a document tomorrow with some helpful links that might help you find some of these materials a little faster. This is an example of a web page from a cleanup site that you might find something similar, although they might vary. On the left-hand side, highlighted in the red box here, you can find some of the important details, such as the site documents, as well as the Ecology contacts that you could reach out to. If you are looking for translations, highlighted in the pink box here, look for the hyperlinks in the language that you want, and you may find either materials translated from sections of the website or the whole website translated, or else an email to find more support so that you can get those translations. And before we move on to the next speaker, I just wanted to note that we're all here tonight because the MACA rules have not been updated in a long time, and we have a really great opportunity to make improvements. Before we move on how you can all take action, we'll first hear some brief stories from various communities around Washington state. First, starting with Lee First, our Twin Harbors waterkeeper, and some of the issues they face in Grays Harbor.
Great, thank you, Eleanor. I'm going to bring up my presentation here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so welcome to Grays Harbor and the cities of Aberdeen, Hoquiam, Cosmopolis, and Westport. These cities are adjacent to Grays Harbor, which I try to always call the Chehalis River estuary. This estuary is one of the 6th largest estuaries on the US Pacific coast. For over 100 years, it was a heavy industrial area centered around logging and milling. For almost 100 years, massive log booms floated down the lower Chehalis River and its tributaries to the mills. Today, there remains only one mill, but much toxic legacy remains. This just shows this is the Chehalis River watershed with the estuary circled. Within the city limits of Aberdeen and Hoquiam, there are over 161 MODCA cleanup sites. Most have not had any cleanup process started. Many of the sites are leaking underground storage tanks, and most of those have been cleaned up via the voluntary process. The most contaminated sites are rated for environmental and human health risk with a rating from 1 to 5, with 1 having the most human and environmental risk. There are about 10 sites in the Grays Harbor, the Chehalis River area, the Chehalis River estuary area with a rating of 1. But few of these sites have even entered into the cleanup process. Many of these sites that are rated 1 are near schools and low-income neighborhoods. Unlike some cities like Bellingham, there are no willing partners to promote cleanup like the Port of Bellingham. The Port of Grays Harbor operates in most of this area here, but is not a willing partner. These are some of the sites along the shoreline in the estuary. The only one amongst these photos that has been cleaned up is the site in the lower left-hand corner, which is the former Saginaw Shingle Mill. It was cleaned up about 20 years ago, and it has been delisted. However, as you can see from the photo here, there is wood waste and creosote timbers, and all kinds of debris that is still there. The site in the center, an old shipyard, Packenen Shipyard, has had very limited sediment removal, and much remains to be done. Weyerhaeuser has several contaminated sites that have not been cleaned up. And we continually ask the MODCA staff at Ecology why there is no action at these sites. They reply that they don't have enough staff and that these sites are not a priority and there are no willing partners. There is one site that is about to get cleaned up under MODCA, and it's not on the estuary. It's in Westport, and it's owned by the Port of Grays Harbor. So the Port of Grays Harbor has all these kind of grossly contaminated toxic legacy sites, I like to call them, but they're not doing anything to clean them up, but they're very, very hyper-focused on this one Hungry Whale site, which is a convenience store and a gas station. Because this brings in a lot of money from the rental and whatever from this gas station and convenience store. It was first cleaned up in 1991 when Ecology's contractor performed a tank closure at the site, but much contamination remained. And so they're undergoing a second cleanup, which is starting next summer. And this is kind of an unusual site here. It might be like kind of like the Georgia Pacific site in Bellingham. It's called the Weyerhaeuser Aberdeen site. So around 1998, the Grays Harbor Historical Seaport, a 501c3 nonprofit development authority based in Aberdeen, purchased 14 acres from Weyerhaeuser, which was this is a known contaminated site. They purchased it for $1 from Weyerhaeuser. This purchase relieved Weyerhaeuser of any and all cleanup liability. The Historical Seaport is slowly working to develop it into a community asset that will include tourist shops, educational and recreational opportunities, and it also is the home of the Lady Washington tall ship that you can see in the center photo. So the Grays Harbor Seaport Authority is under an agreed order to do investigations and close data gaps, conduct a feasibility, and then eventually clean up the site, which they think will take about 25 years. And they're, you know, I think it's a great idea. Aberdeen and Hoquiam, the lower Chehalis River estuary area needs a place like this, like a tourist destination. But I think these folks have a really hard road ahead of them. And we do use this site. We use it for tours. And these folks have a event center that's kind of run down, but we just had a really successful event there where we targeted the Hispanic community, of which there are a lot. There's a huge Hispanic community in Grays Harbor County. And so we have a great relationship with the public participation grant people. The funding that we got in this current round pays for our fantastic Spanish translator who's in the center photo there with the pink hat. His name is Carlos Osorio, and he comes whenever we're giving a tour or we have a public outreach event. He's there translating, and he goes to meetings of various Latinx groups, and he's really helped us to make inroads with our friends in the Hispanic community. And that's really all I have to say. I hope I stayed within my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Lee. Next
You're welcome.
up, we have Jamie Hearn with the Duwamish River Community Coalition. So Jamie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Hearn, and I work for the Duwamish River Community Coalition. The community that I serve is the Duwamish Valley, which are the neighborhoods along the Duwamish River in South Seattle. And the Duwamish Valley is home to many Matka sites. Living near these sites, along with other sources of toxic pollution. Should I pause, Eleanor, or?
Is it back? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
My
Not
computer's
yet.
done weird things. Let me bring it back up. Okay. I don't know how that happened.
That's okay.
That has never happened to me before. I so appreciative of everyone's patience tonight.
And thank you, Eleanor, you're doing great. So where was I? Oh, so living near these sites, along with other sources of toxic pollution, leads to really serious health impacts. One of them being life expectancy. Our community's life expectancy is 8 years shorter when compared to other residents in the Seattle and King County average, and 13 years shorter when compared to the lifespan of residents for the neighborhood of Laurelhurst in Seattle. And this is really significant because our community is predominantly low income and comprised of people of color and has some of the highest populations of immigrants and refugees in Seattle. And one of the many environmental injustices that our community faces is lack of green space. In the Duwamish Valley, residents only have access to an average of 40 square feet of green space versus the average of 387 square feet in the Seattle city limits. So this is of particular importance when we look at one of our Matka sites in the Duwamish Valley. The Duwamish Waterway Park is one of South Park's only green spaces, and it is a really vital part of community life. It is a space for families and children to enjoy river access and access to the outdoors. In 2019, arsenic and lead were found in the soil at the park and along the shoreline of the river. After more studies were done, it became clear that much more pollution was present in the soil than had been originally expected, and some pollutants could also be found in the groundwater. This led to the park being closed, which had a huge impact on our community. You can see the park fenced off on the picture in the right. And so that happened in 2019, and this was especially hard for our community during COVID, when access to green space became a really critical part of maintaining one's mental and physical health. And so for several years, while the park was fenced off, our community didn't have any information about why the space was closed, what chemicals were present, and what they could expect to find out, when they could expect to find out more about cleanup. So in addition to not being able to access this really important space, we also weren't getting any information. So more studies still need to be done so that cleanup can begin. But this site is an example of the way that MOTCA procedures don't currently prioritize the communities that are most in need. And frontline communities deserve efficient cleanups done in a reasonable time. And they also deserve access to information about sites in their community. And so while many MOTCA sites are not public spaces, in the Duwamish Valley, it is almost impossible to live a normal life without coming into close contact with toxic chemicals. And our communities deserve to live a safe and healthy life free of toxic exposure.
Hi, folks. I'm Erin Dilworth. I'm with Communities for a Healthy Bay in Tacoma, and I just have a few quick slides to chat with you about. So this is a picture of the contaminated sites in Tacoma. There's quite a lot, over 300, and you can see the different colors give you the different statuses. Only a few, only some of these sites have actually been cleaned up. Many of them are actually still awaiting cleanup. It's the light purple ones where cleanup is considered to be complete. So I just wanted to put this in here just to give kind of a perspective on the number of toxic sites in a city like Tacoma. Okay, and then one of our biggest remaining contaminated sites in Tacoma is called the Occidental Chemical Site. It is on the High Lobos Waterway, and they were operating in the early 1900s up until 2005, and they made really nasty stuff like bleach and chlorine and sodium hydroxide, and they didn't have very good housekeeping protocols, so they had a lot of leaking waste containers, and they were also just dumping their waste into the waterway. This is actually part of the national, it's considered an ecology supervised contaminated site, but it's actually also the last remaining part of Tacoma's larger Superfund site. So that's a federal designation around toxic site cleanups. And we are still waiting for this cleanup to happen. It first got identified in the early 80s, and we're still waiting on that draft cleanup action plan. And if you go to the next slide, please. So Eleanor mentioned earlier the disproportionate cost analysis as one of the tools that ecology uses to try to figure out which cleanup action plan alternative, so how they want to clean up the site, which one they should use. We have a lot of problems with the disproportionate cost analysis, or the DCA, because it really doesn't have a way to monetize or quantify the ecosystem services and public health benefits from a fully cleaned up and remediated site. So, but more concrete costs like construction materials and construction labor, all of that type of stuff, it's really easy to put a dollar sign on. So the cleanup costs tend to be really overrepresented and the benefits tend to be underrepresented. And what we're looking at here is a draft of the different alternatives for the Occidental Cleanup Action Plan. So this hasn't been finalized yet, but ecology is leaning towards alternative E. And what you can see there, what this graph actually represents is the pounds of contamination that would actually be removed. And so you can see with that alternative, especially compared to alternative G, they're going to clean up less than half of the contamination that's in the ground. And that's because the disproportionate cost analysis picked alternative E as the most economically, financially feasible thing to do. So this is one of the things that we see as a big problem with the rule as it stands now, and one of the things that we're really going to advocate to change as we're going through this rulemaking. And I think that's all I have, and I think we're on to Mindy. Yeah.
Hi, thank you, Erin. Hello, everyone. My name is Mindy Roberts, and I'm with Washington Conservation Action. I have been fortunate to work with a number of talented staff at Front and Centered, a nonprofit organization, and wanted to share some analyses that they completed back in 2017. For several decades, we've heard news stories that toxic waste sites are disproportionately located in communities of color, but no one had looked closely in Washington. So in 2017, Front and Centered compared where MOTCA sites are located across the state and compared that to a socioeconomic indicator that they called the Social Vulnerability Index. And that included a combination of income as well as racial demographics as well. And my colleague Katie's going to put in the chat a link where you can actually get access to the report yourself. And if you zoom in on places like Yakima, this is an example where the darker the colors here, these are the census blocks, the darker the color is the higher the social vulnerability. So the greater proportion of low income, the greater proportion of communities of color. And each dot that you see here represents a different MOTCA site that's awaiting cleanup. And you can start to see a pattern here where there are more dots in the darker shapes and fewer dots in the lighter shape. That means more toxic waste sites are in communities of color in the Yakima area. If you go on to the next slide, the same pattern was found by Front and Centered all across the state. On the left is a close-up of the Everett area in Snohomish County. Again, there are more dots in the darker shapes, meaning more MOTCA sites in communities of color. On the right is a close-up of Aberdeen and Hoquiam that, as Lee talked about earlier, it's the same pattern. So this report was the first statewide analysis that confirmed patterns that other places around the United States had found. The next slide. The report has some really great information. I encourage you all to read it, and I wanted to highlight a few of their findings from 2017 that still hold today. We know that just under half of all the toxic sites in the state are located in areas that are disproportionately non-white. Also, just over half of those sites are located in areas that are disproportionately low income. Moreover, what the findings showed is the mechanisms that are used by the Department of Ecology when they clean up toxic sites don't include equity. And so that's something that our coalition of organization has been working on for a number of years. That means that there are systems in place where communities of color and low-income communities have a much higher likelihood to live near toxic waste sites, and that's just not fair. That means that we need to change the system to first account for racial demographics explicitly and then manage cleanups in a way that eliminates that disparity over time. Next slide. Again, keep in mind, these are recommendations from 2017, 6 years ago. That included significantly increasing the amount of grant money that goes to projects that incorporate environmental justice. Earlier, my colleagues talked about the ranking method that is used by the Department of Ecology. It is now called the SHARP tool. It needs to include an equity element within that, which we have been pushing for a number of years. It also requires that programs that require funding need to conduct an equity analysis to make sure that their approaches are appropriate. And then finally, we need to increase outreach to environmental justice communities to make sure that organizations and people know that these are in their community and that they have capacity to begin managing grants to help them with community engagement to really push along cleanups in their own communities. So the next slide is my last one. So you've learned a little bit more about MOTCA with some of these stories here, and hopefully you're thinking about, okay, what more can you do? The first link that Katie shares in the chat here is where you can find out more about cleanup sites, different types of toxic waste sites that include MOTCA, but they also include things like Superfund. And on that page, you can go to this other link. A number of the presenters have shared something called What's in My Neighborhood. If you go to that link, it's got a very strange, long and very complicated URL, but if you go to that site and start poking around, you can find out more about what's in your own neighborhood or in the neighborhood of people that you care about. So take a look at this website. It could definitely be a little scary to see so many sites, but frankly, that's what we are advocating for right now is cleaning up more of these sites and also eliminating this disparity that shows that they're disproportionately in communities of color. So you have an opportunity to make your voice heard and submit a public comment, and that's where Katie is going to walk you through that. Thanks.
Thanks, Mindy. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Burns, and I'm with Washington Conservation Action. And I just want to take a moment to thank each of our presenters this evening. It was really great to hear, really impactful to hear stories about the communities that you live in and serve. And I think this just underscores how important it is that we have a law that really protects our people and our environment. So to wrap us up this evening, I'm going to walk us through the 3 priorities that we'd like to see ecology incorporate into the cleanup law updates. And those are environmental justice through cumulative health impacts, clarity on the disproportionate cost analysis, and effective public engagement. And then I'll take us through a demonstration of how you can make your voice heard through a public comment. Next slide, please. So our first priority centers on environmental justice, specifically on the cumulative health impacts that people living close to toxic waste sites experience. As we've heard tonight, toxic waste sites in Washington are clustered in low-income communities and communities of color. And in addition to the health impacts that come from living near these sites, these communities often also suffer from the consequences of living near other forms of pollution. And this can include airports, freeways, and Superfund sites. These are compounded exposures, and they have effects on health, well-being, and quality of life outcomes. And the map on the right here is another example showing how health impacts are dispersed throughout our state, with the dark blue showing areas with higher impacts. So when we're prioritizing cleanup sites and determining how they're cleaned up and when, cumulative impacts of living in areas where pollution is heavily concentrated really needs to be considered by ecology. Next slide, please. So our next priority is the disproportionate cost analysis, which Eleanor and Aaron explained a little bit more in depth earlier. So the disproportionate cost analysis currently does not give enough guidance to accurately represent the ecosystem services and the public health benefits of a thorough, more protected cleanup when compared to the cost of the cleanup. And this leads to a consistent underestimation of the ecosystem and public health benefits and an overrepresentation of the cleanup costs. We're asking for ecology to provide more guidance for consistent analysis that accurately represents the true benefits and ecosystem services and public health of a thorough cleanup. And our final priority is public engagement and public notice. All members of the public have a right to know about toxic waste sites and cleanups happening near them and in their communities. The current methods that ecology uses just do not make this information sufficiently accessible, especially for those without easy access to the internet or technology. So to ensure that the most effective communication strategies are being used, ecology needs to gather information about the affected communities to determine the best modes of communication to reach affected communities. In addition, we'd like to see ecology provide more effective outreach to the general public about how to find information and how to receive notifications beyond the current website registry. Most Washington residents are not frequently checking the Department of Ecology's website, They're not looking at the hazardous site registry. They don't even know it exists. And it's ecology's responsibility to make sure that this information reaches the public. And right now, the way that they are doing this is just not working. So you have an opportunity to have your voice heard on this by submitting a public comment. And there are two easy ways to do this, either through a landing page that Washington Conservation Action has put together, or through the Department of Ecology's website. And I will walk us through a demonstration of both of those options now. And we'll also send out all of this information in an email after our webinar. So don't worry if you're not able to follow along right now. But if you can follow along now, Mindy will post the links to the action page and the Department of Ecology's website in the chat. And I will just share my screen if I'm able to and take us through a demo. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, great. So this first link in the chat will take you to Washington Conservation Action's action page. It's very easy. All you need to do is fill out your first and last name, your contact information, and down here at the bottom, you'll see that we have pre-filled a comment letter that hits on the 3 priorities that I just covered. You're more than welcome to customize this in any way you see fit, personalize it, whatever you want to do, or you can just send it as is once you've filled in your contact information. If you choose to submit a comment this way, we just ask that you fill out this form by Friday, April 14th, so tomorrow at 3 p.m. so that we can get these organized on the back end and make sure they get to ecology on time. And the second option is to go directly through the Department of Ecology's website. This is another great option. It's very easy. You just fill in your first and last name. And if you'd like to potentially be reached by Ecology about your comments, you'll want to be sure to include your email address. And then you'll scroll down to the bottom. You can type your comments here, paste your comments here. You're more than welcome to copy the comment from the action page too, and we'll share that in the email after this webinar. Or you can write your own comment. And with this option, you have a little bit more time. You have until Sunday, April 16th at 11:59 p.m. You also have the option to upload a file. So if you'd prefer to upload a Word document or a PDF, that's an option too. So once you have your information filled out and your comment typed in or uploaded, just press continue and they'll receive your comment. And that wraps up our presentation. I think we'll open it up for question and answer. If anybody would like help accessing either of these comment options, we can help you with that. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Feel free to type any questions in the comment box or into the Q&A. And thank you, everyone, all of our presenters tonight who shared their stories, and our interpreters for being on hand to help with translations. And I'm just making sure there's something in the Q&A. We have a question. This isn't related to the topic, but is the recording going to be available? And the answer is yes. By tomorrow morning, I say around probably 9 or 10 a.m. You should be able to access the recording. You'll get an email to the email address that you use to RSVP for this webinar tonight. And along with that, you'll get lots of other links and things like that to some of the things we mentioned, like the What's in My Neighborhood tool, as well as the link to the Washington Conservation Action alert so that you can submit your comment there, or if you choose to do it through the Ecology website, you'll also have that link as well. And Lee, you had something?
Yes, you know, I drive myself crazy and Ecology crazy because I about the issue of not reaching the public. And so in my area, you know, they don't even submit a press release to the local newspaper. And I just think that's terrible. And, you know, I would really like to get some ideas from you guys about how should we ask them to reach the public? You know, because I really don't know, you know, I don't like the way they do it because they don't reach anybody, but I don't know what to ask for.
Yes, that is a great question, Lee. I'll let anybody else jump in. I do see that somebody on the attendees does have their hand raised, so we'll get to them in just a moment. But to answer that, Lee, so the rest of our panelists here tonight have been on the Model Toxics Control Act Stakeholder and Tribal Advisory Group for a couple of years now, that have had input on this rulemaking update. And so this has been a common theme throughout that whole time. And we've made several comments that improvements need to be made. There's also some updates coming with the HEAL Act, where there's going to be some listening sessions. And it sounds like improvements for how the public is notified and how the public can participate in these public comment periods is going to be open for some discussion. And so there might be some additional guidance and other things coming out with that. But I think, you know, we need to keep on letting them know that they're not reaching the right people. And it's hard because if they don't hear from people, they think there's not a problem because they're not reaching those people to begin with. And so there's sort of this like not a positive feedback cycle that helps improve the system. But I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts or comments to add to that. And so then we had a hand raised by, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, Alfana, and I don't have host capabilities, so somebody else I think needs to unmute this person. Oh, there we go.
Hey, my name is Alpana and I am a advocate for environmental justice from like 10, 15 years. And I do not understand why they do not, when you know that they do not clean the those areas where the people of color are living, or giving some kind of written explanation why those areas are not been cleaned up. If that can be done before they're making the new rules, that every time when you clean up, and if those areas are not been cleaned up, so you have to give a written explanation why those areas are not been cleaned up. What is the specific reason behind that? Because it is impacting our health, our family's health, and many more. You know, it's like from one generation to another generation, people are sick. So that is my question, and that's my suggestion too.
That is an excellent comment. And I love that suggestion that they have to explain why, because maybe that will help them.
We should not answer. We are not ready to hear any answer verbally. We want to hear a written explanation, and so that we can take action for this, why those areas are not been cleaned. What is the reason? And this is the time limit. Still not. We are not invisible. We are human beings, and we should be treated as a human being. I fight for this from years and years and years, you know. So now I want to know what's the reason that they give that these things are not cleaned up.
I don't know.
I'll take the first stab at that. That's a great question. I mean, we know that because of systemic racism and the policies and systems that have been prominent in our culture forever, that really heavy polluting industry has been purposely set up in communities of color to begin with, and in low income communities. And then once we get around, and I shouldn't say we're not doing the cleanups, but once the cleanups happen, it tends to be folks that buy property and want to redevelop it, and maybe they're gonna just pay for it all at once. And they're going to do that in areas of their choosing, and the areas that maybe are going to get them the most money if they clean it up and can redevelop. So what we found is that a lot of money, cleanup money from these private entities tends to go to these places that may not be where there's a community or of color, a low income community. And that's one of the comments that we want to make this round, is that, and we would really encourage anyone who's going to submit comments to maybe say something similar, that ecology really needs to set up some mechanisms to show that they are going to decrease that disparity. So right now, there's really nothing in the rule where ecology can be held accountable for making sure that there are less and less and less of these toxic sites in communities of color and low income communities. So if we all push really hard and say, hey, you need to show us how you're working on this and how you're going to make it better, we're really hoping that that's something that they can either put into the rule or, strategic plan something. But right now, yeah, we agree. And we see that as one of kind of the shortcomings of where this rule is at right now.
Yeah, you're right that this is all about racism, and you're not visible anywhere. They only take us and consider us when they want our vote. Apart from that, we are nowhere visible. But this is a justice issue that we have to push it and get the result, so that they can do it again. That kind of attitude, we have to keep going. Otherwise, there will be decades after decades, people will be, in bigger kind of disease. From one generation to another generation, living in that kind of atmosphere, that kind of situation. That's my request, and I'm there always to push back, because I'm doing environmental justice, all other areas also. I'm there always. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If you can put your comment to the Department of Ecology, it's great if we can get more and more and more comments from different people.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful.
I'm already doing, not in the Department of Ecology, I haven't done, but in environmental justice, I'm already doing, writing to my senators and reps, and also pursuing as much as I can, but I will definitely look into that.
We appreciate all your hard work on this. We agree with you, and it's so frustrating. And like Erin said, the more voices we can have on this, the better. And again, I don't have host permissions, but Darlene also has her hand raised if someone can unmute her. I know she has.
So I tried to put it down.
Oh, yes, your hand's down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for attending. You should be able to hover over her and give her permission to speak. Thanks for hanging tight. There she is. And I know Darlene's done a lot of work with toxic legacy contaminated sites herself.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. For the speakers, the presenters that have Superfund sites, have you reached out to the new Region 10 administrator? And if so, what has your experience been, if he has even responded, or anybody on that new staff?
I can talk about this a little bit. So the Duwamish River is split into two different Superfund sites, and we have talked to. Are you talking about Regional Administrator Six Killer?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, he's been really supportive. He's come to the Duwamish Valley 2 times, I believe. We've been able to show him some of our Matka sites in person. He's gone to the river to see the river. He's done a tour, and he seems really receptive to the work that we're doing and the feedback that we have in general for EPA. And he also seems to really care about environmental justice principles. So in DRCC's experience, it's always been positive working with him, and he's very responsive to us.
Well, is he able to help you in any way and get some of those toxins out of the soil and the waters?
For the Superfund sites,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I don't know about speeding up the process, or I don't know. I think he does more like behind the scenes advocacy, but it is nice to have someone in that position who really seems to understand environmental justice, because you know, he is able to kind of take those messages back with him. And so when he does interact with folks who work for the Superfund office, he can, you know, talk to these really technical people and make sure that when they are looking at cleanup plans, that they are considering, you know, cumulative health and environmental justice principles.
Anyone else have anything to add? Oh, we got 2 questions in the chat box. First one is, as far as ecology not getting the word out to people, can't we use modern tools like social media to spread the word and get larger groups of people involved? And then I realize not everyone has immediate access to internet or phones, but I also know that there are many places like local libraries that offer free Wi-Fi. Thoughts? And it looks like the full second question hasn't been typed out yet. It's just, is there a better? So if you want to continue typing your question, we can start tackling the first one. Does anybody have a response to that? Otherwise, I can take a stab at it. So for this one, modern tools like social media to get the word out, some of that is being currently used. And I think one of the problems that we do see is not everyone does have internet access or the ability to go to their local library to go check it out. And like we mentioned before, not everyone's really aware that these toxic legacy contaminated sites exist to begin with. And so they're not really looking out for notifications that something's happening at one of them, or that it's there, or a change is happening. And so that makes it challenging if people don't know about it to begin with, to sign up to get notifications about it. And so I think somewhat of what Lee was talking about earlier, it'd be great to make sure that everyone has an increased awareness about it and they know what their options are to access the information, and that it is accessible in many different ways. When the original rule was written 30 years ago, I think they try to keep things a little bit open, but I think there were things in there like putting things in newspapers, like, you know, printed newspapers. And I know very few people these days who get printed newspapers. I think it can still be effective, and that, you know, is one avenue, and we shouldn't necessarily stop doing that, but that might not be, you know, you might not just check off your box of, yeah, we reached out to the public, or I wouldn't consider my job done if I just put a notification in a printed newspaper that I reached out to the public. I think there are a lot of additional ways that should be required, and that we should reach out to the public to figure out what, you know, makes sense to them, because I obviously have internet access, and so I'm not always aware of what other ways people are accessing information. Did anybody have anything they wanted to add before we get to the second question? All right, the next question is there a better way to secure funding besides grants? Maybe you're requiring larger corporations to be taxed and require to clean up those sites, especially ones that have caused it in the first place. Thank you. Yes. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I can take the first pass at this. And yeah, thank you for the question. So the good news is that since the 1980s, this has been a polluter pays law. It's a tax on hazardous substances at the first possession. So that includes Washington State has a number of oil refineries. That is the biggest driver of revenues that go into the pot of money that's available for these grants, but it's also pesticides and other things like that as well. I will say that a few years ago, the tax itself was being attacked by the oil industry and a number of others to try to reduce their tax burden, which meant less money would be available for the cleanups as well. And I think that's where, groups that you may not think of as advocates ended up stepping forward. Ports, for example, there are a lot of contaminated sites around ports, and they made the case they actually need that cleanup money as well. But there was a pretty big knockdown, drag out fight in the legislature. We now have that tax to be more stable and fund programs and cleanup sites. That said, there's not enough money in that to clean up every site anytime soon. And so there's always a prioritization of which sites get cleaned up. And that's where we think that because no one looked at where the sites were located related to, say, racial demographics, now that we know that they're disproportionately in communities of color, we think we need to prioritize the state funding that is available to clean up those sites first and foremost. And if there are other sites that are maybe in predominantly white communities, there may be other mechanisms that maybe a private developer would be willing to clean up that site if they're going to do some type of a redevelopment of that as well. So the good news is that the polluters do pay for that. Now the oil industry will argue that they're not the only ones responsible for that, and that there are other pollutant types that pay less disproportionately into that tax. There's all sorts of reasons people want to reduce that, but in the end, there's not enough money, and at least for now, the oil industry pays the most into that fund. Over time, maybe there's some more that we need to do, but anytime you raise a tax, even in the state of Washington, it really takes a lot of effort to make sure that goes through smoothly. So we're going to see how this goes for another couple of years and probably take a look at it. But the good news is that there are hundreds of millions of dollars available each 2 years to continue with cleanups. But some of these cleanups are hundreds of millions all by themselves, like the Duwamish that Jamie was talking about has so many sites that, and there's another 13,998 sites in the state that need some attention too. So lots behind that. Happy to talk more about the funding, but it is expensive to clean up, which is also why part of the revenue that goes in actually goes to prevention of further problems in the first place. Anybody else want to add?
I would just add that, when they created the MACA rules in 1988, they thought that they were going to get all the sites cleaned up by now, and shows how little we understood about the situation back then. And so as Mindy was saying, there's like more and more sites added on each year to the hazardous site list than are being taken off, and it takes years and years. And even here in Bellingham, some of the sites the Port of Bellingham acquired with the idea that they were going to clean it up faster than if it was left in private hands, because they are eligible for more grant funding and other things like that. The Georgia Pacific is on the hook for paying for a portion up to a certain amount for the cleanup costs, and that is a whole other issue. But it has taken decades and decades to get those sites cleaned up. They're not fully cleaned up yet, and it is just an incredibly slow process. And it's sort of interesting how, the initiative was passed in the beginning because they recognized the Superfund program, the federal level, wasn't happening fast enough. And so maybe we're in a better place if we didn't have MACA, but at the same time, I think there's so much room for improvement. And so that's what we're really hoping to see in these rules. However, we'll see what comes out in the end. And I think that's why it's so important that you all have your voices heard in this and submit public comments, so that it's not just us saying the same things over and over again. It's community members and other folks also sharing their experiences and their issues that they've come across as well. Great. And yes, it's very vast, complex, and expensive. You got it. And there are some ways they've been looking into some ways to sort of expedite some of this process, but there's a bit of a balance between, saying, yeah, just go ahead, clean it up, and, not doing it right, or cutting corners and maybe not having an end product that we really is doing justice to cleaning up the site. And so there's that balance there between trying to expedite things, but do it still in a way that is protective of human health and the environment. Right, any other questions? Comments, discussion? Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate all of you tuning in on this. At least here in Bellingham, it's sunny. I have one of my toxic cleanup sites that finally is partially cleaned up after decades of being polluted by a pulp and paper mill. So thank you again for tuning in. Keep an eye out in your email tomorrow for a link to a document that will have a whole bunch of additional information, including how you can make a comment if you didn't tonight already, or if you want to make one again or share that link with some friends, please do so. The final comment is due by this Sunday, and if you use the Washington Conservation Action link, that does need to be in by 3 p.m. this Friday. All right, well, thanks so much, everyone. I think we're gonna sign off.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Yeah, thank you, Eleanor.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Well, thank you. I didn't know if we wanted to debrief at all or if we just want to meet tomorrow at 9.
I'll see you all tomorrow at 9.
Are we meeting tomorrow at 9?
Oh,
I don't have that.
When we last checked in, we said that we were going to hold meeting at 9 on our calendars, and I just sent out the calendar invite.
Okay, yeah, I remember saying we were going to meet. I just didn't get the invite.
Okay, I will try resending it.
Okay, thanks. I felt like I was forgetting something. I was like, I think we have a meeting Friday, but I never got anything. So yeah, if you could resend it to me, that'd be great. And I'll be there.
It's been a whirlwind. All right. Well, all right.
Yeah.
Go get some
Deserve a
dinner.
break. Yeah. Thanks,
Bye, everybody.
Eleanor. See you tomorrow. Bye.